Missouri has added another offensive lineman in the transfer portal. And in order to gamble in the portal, well, you got to figure out who you're going to gamble on the current roster too. So let's talk about those players. Right now on Locked On Mizzou.
You are Locked On Mizzou, your daily podcast on the Missouri Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, all you true sons and daughters, I'm John Miller, your Mizzou mafioso and the central scrutinizer of Missouri Tigers football and basketball. And Dennis Gates and company have a chance to go to 3-0 tomorrow in Oxford. And really, Ole Miss is looking pretty ripe for the picking. Plus, Missouri adds what could be a starting quality offensive lineman. And also, this edition is going to affect one of Missouri's best players as well. And before I start, I do want to quickly remind you today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel, the college football playoff. Well, it's almost over, but FanDuel is always the best place to get into the action all playoff long. So visit FanDuel.com to get your college football playoff profit boosts every single game day. And you know what? When it comes to the transfer portal, it does occur to me that, yes, a lot of this is gambling. And you're simply put, of course, what you're doing is, if you're Missouri, you're gambling more on the portal than you are more on high school recruiting because, well, you're hitting a higher percentage. It's as simple as that. But if you're going to gamble in the portal, you got to gamble on certain players on your roster as well. So it's important to figure out who you can count on for the upcoming season. Basically, I think Missouri should be finished at running back and tight end, for example. Really, Missouri never even got started at tight end. I don't think they're really under any obligation to take any players at that position. Missouri has already added one running back, a developmental player, I would say, behind Ahmad Hardy and Jamal Roberts, of course. So that's obviously one of the smallest positions of need on the roster for next season anyway. And all I'm really thinking about is 2026. 2027, with the exception of the quarterback position, I'm just simply not really looking that far ahead. And speaking of the quarterback position, well, with Matt Zollers in the fold, and yes, Austin Simmons now officially official. He put a graphic of himself in a Missouri uniform out on his social media here recently. So Austin Simmons to Missouri is done, and with Matt Zollers on the roster, well, if you're Missouri, do you really need another quarterback? I think actually the answer is yes. The question is more, how much do you need to spend on that position? If it were me, I wouldn't spend a lot. If Amari Odom wants to come in and compete for the job, that's fantastic. I'd love to have him. But not for $750,000 because that's the cost of a lot of starters in this league on the defensive side of the ball. And if Missouri is going to, well, have even close to what kind of defense they had last season, still a lot of starters to be added to on the defensive side of the ball, except for linebacker, where I think Missouri should be finished, and also safety as well, with the addition of Jadon Blair at safety from Notre Dame, also Robert Woodyard at linebacker as well. To me, those are two positions where, when I say done, I don't mean you're literally finished at the position. I mean you should be finished spending premium money on these positions. If you want to add depth, by all means add depth, but I'm talking about buying guys who you think are going to be immediate starters. So I already mentioned Matt Zollers is obviously at least a depth piece, if not a guy who can compete for the number one job next season. Santana Banner's another obvious name as well at safety, as is Nick Rodriguez. Now, when it comes to the rest of that defense, I already mentioned linebackers. Again, I think Missouri should be done there because you've got Brian Huff, you've got Jeremiah Beasley, a couple young guys on your roster, again, among others, who I think at this point you need to gamble on. Gamble because you're not getting that second portal period, importantly, too, after spring football. To me, you got to gamble that you can develop those players. And Missouri's done a relatively good job at developing linebackers over the years. And to me, you hope that Huff and Beasley can become what you think they can become. And maybe there's a benefit to this as well, not having that spring portal period. And maybe these guys instead, players like Huff and Beasley, instead of looking over their shoulder for who could be coming in on the roster next, well, they at least know where they're going to be in spring ball. So maybe they'll focus on developing and doing what they need to do at Missouri instead of constantly looking for the next spot during that spring period. So again, to me, roll with the linebackers who you have on the roster already. When it comes to corner, of course, well, Missouri got Jaleel Florence out of Oregon. Hey, he's got a lot of talent. Also a guy who's missed a lot of time the last couple years with injuries as well. So I think Nick DeLoach, a guy who played a decent amount in 2024 and incredibly sparingly in 2025, what do you have in him? And what do you have in Cameron Keys, a guy that I know Brian Smith, who hosts the Portal on our network, is a huge fan of, the Scout Master, follows Florida. Keys, a Florida guy he was a fan of out of high school. How much can you count on him developing? Again, that's another question for the Missouri roster. And when I look at Missouri up front, at defensive tackle and at the edge, really Marquise Gracie-Al is a guy who's been a veteran player, going to be a senior next season. I think Missouri's going to count on him. But the more I look at the depth of both of those spots, I think defensive tackle, the interior, is much more of a need for the Tigers than the edge. That's just my opinion. Part of that is certainly Langdon Kitchen, a guy I've brought up a bunch of times here lately. Also Darius Smith as well. But how about Dayton Hopkins? There's a guy who was either a redshirt freshman or true freshman that got a lot of praise from Eli Drinkwitz during fall camp. Drinkwitz saying, hey, he's going to be a player. To me, edge rusher is such a premium position. If you can gamble on Dayton Hopkins and that gamble pays off, for example, well, again, now you can spend that money on other premium positions like offensive line, for example, on the other side of the ball, where obviously Missouri is going to have to go into the transfer portal. Obviously, Missouri has now signed their second offensive lineman in the portal. Again, I'm going to bring up that young man, Josh Atkins, here in just a little bit. But let's just stay on, for now, the current guys on the roster. They're still highly decorated high school recruits that Missouri has on the roster, even though guys like Keaton Jones have chosen to move on. You still have Logan Reichert. You still have Ryan Justice. You still have Whit Hafer and Jack Lang, by the way, who has only had 1 year in the program, but Lang is one of those guys who is a real physical, just mountain of a man at such a young age. How much has he developed? How much will he develop? Just as importantly, over the next 8 months or so. To me, those four names I just laid out to you. Can you not gamble that one or two of them are going to pay off and maybe be able to be a contributor as a starter next season? Frankly, if the answer is no, then you're probably doing something wrong in terms of developing offensive linemen. So really, this whole period does give you a ton of opportunity to reflect where you are as a program as well. And you know what? I've had some reflections from some of my biggest everyday listeners about the state of the Missouri's transfer portal, especially up front on the offensive line and at the wide receiver position as well. So I want to address those concerns, talk about them, and also, yes, talk about Josh Atkins, the latest addition to this Missouri transfer portal class, coming up here in just a little bit. But first, you know what? I do have to talk about something that most men don't want to talk about, but they absolutely should, whether it's stress from work, money, or life. Well, it doesn't just switch off at night in the bedroom, you know what I'm saying. So when it shows up at the worst possible time, well, Rougiette Ready is designed to help you take back control. Rougiette Ready is a next-generation prescription treatment created to support both the brain and the body so you can feel present, confident, and ready when the moment matters most. And when it comes to this topic, well, people focus on the physical part of it. I would say the mental aspect is every bit as important. Maybe the physical part isn't a problem. Maybe you've just gotten up in your head a little bit. Well, that's why Rougiette Ready is different than its competitors. And if you're ready and thinking about taking the next step, now's the time. Head to Rougiette.com/LockedOnCollege. That is RUGIET.com/LockedOnCollege to get 15% off your order for a limited time. It is Rougiette Ready. Feel present, feel confident, and feel ready. And as I'm sure you everyday watchers have noticed, yes, I am constructing some new helmet shelves behind myself because indeed that is how many helmets Missouri has come out with in the last decade or so, especially during that 17 to 18 period where Barry Odom really, really lost his mind, I think, or his staff who was putting out the helmets did. Let's put it that way. But hey, I'm a collector. What can I say? And yes, ladies and gentlemen, this is why you have to stay and get your degree from the University of Missouri so you can get the good helmet shelving. But speaking of everydayers, one of my longtime listeners, JMFB, says, I'm really concerned about this portal. We're very thin at wide receiver and in the front seven. 2 years ago, I thought moving forward, those were strengths of the team. Losing James Madison, Wilson, Burks, Marquise Johnson, etc., plus the graduates and NFL guys, man, we still have a long way to go, but I trust in the staff. I hated losing Keywan Lacey, but it turned out okay. The portal giveth and the portal taketh away. And I have seen some Missouri fans, by the way, have some consternation watching the college football playoff here. Of course, Keywan Lacey and Ole Miss got knocked out last night in the semis by Miami. But I'll just say this. Ahmad Hardy for Keywan Lacey, I'll take that trade. I mean, granted, Keywan Lacey was great for Ole Miss this year. I think all of us who are Missouri fans were very disappointed to see Keywan Lacey go. I'll just speak for myself and say I was definitely disappointed when it happened. I think I was very aware of how good Lacey was. I think his talent was obvious. Unfortunately, well, he lost. Well, I don't know if lost is the wrong word. He certainly fumbled a couple of times early in his time with Missouri, and considering the Tigers had a couple of veterans at the position at the time, including Nate Noel, it just didn't seem like, well, it made a lot of sense to elevate Lacey from the third string on the team. I mean, late in the season, he got some key carries against South Carolina, for example, I can remember. So it's not as though he was a forgotten person or anything like that. But again, to my listener's point there, to John's point there, I think, again, the portal giveth and the portal taketh away. What you have to do is look at the net result at the end of the period here. But it's understandable if you're a little worried about the receiver position because, well, obviously Missouri has some talent coming back at the position. Donovan Alubade, notably. Also, a couple of young guys, Demarion Folks and Sean Terry, who played a little bit last season. Folks most notably in the return game for the Tigers, where he certainly provided some good stuff there. But then you've got, a couple of true freshmen in Jabari Brady, one of which I think Brady could potentially play some for Missouri next season. Devion Hill-Lomax, on the other hand, seems much more like a high upside project, a guy who's got a lot of length and height to him, does DHL, but it just strikes me as much more of a guy who is going to take a while, more of a Denario Alexander type who's going to be growing into the position a little bit. So that then leaves, well, Horatio Fields, who I talked about yesterday, Missouri got from Auburn, and also Caleb Goody from Cincinnati. Now with Goody, I think you've got a pretty good idea of what you're getting. I actually think he is a pretty good one-to-one replacement for Marquise Johnson. And in fact, in 24 and 25, just statistically, Goody was undeniably the more productive player. So if anything, you've got an upgrade there, I think, with Goody, just a very good replacement. I think Horatio Fields is a really interesting one because my colleague Zach Blackerby over at Locked On Auburn likes his talent, but he's had injury questions as well, much like Jaleel Florence on the other side of the ball at corner, if you could just tell me right now that Missouri was going to get 10 to 12 games out of Horatio Fields, I'd feel great about it. I'm just not sure that I can count on that whatsoever. So to me, you look at that wide receiver room, it's pretty clear Missouri's got to add one more body, I think, at least in the transfer portal to at least give themselves more options. Again, if I'm looking at this like a gambler would, well, even if I have a strong position on the river, for example, that's still only an 85-90% chance to win. I can still lose there, obviously, 15 to 10% of the time, and, well, the smart person is going to account for that eventuality. You're not going to win them all in the portal or in recruiting, as we've seen time and time again at literally every program in the country. And certainly Missouri is looking at every program in the country for talent, and they found one in Arizona State with Josh Atkins, the latest addition to Missouri's transfer portal class. 6'4", 310-pound offensive lineman. Is likely to play immediately, I would say. I think the question is where, because he's played at left tackle the past 2 seasons at Arizona State. So then the question is, hey, does that mean Caden Green, who played left tackle for Missouri last season, well, he was a preseason All-American left guard. Does that mean he kicks back over one spot to that left guard position? At this point, I'd say it's too early to say. Quite honestly, this move, the real plus of it is it gives Missouri a lot of flexibility. You could certainly see a world where Josh Atkins maybe plays right tackle and you leave Caden Green at left tackle, or, again, maybe based on who Missouri's able to get, the cost of said acquisition of said lineman. Again, just gives you a bunch of flexibility here, since Green himself has already proven capable of playing left guard and left tackle. I think, though, in a ideal world, I think you would probably have Atkins at left tackle, maybe move Green back to left guard where he's probably his best, I would say. And again, Missouri still needs to find a center in this class, which is probably the most important part of anything, but just having that flexibility at the offensive line spot definitely strikes me as a huge positive. And on the basketball side, boy, the vibes have certainly shifted in record time here after bragging rights for Dennis Gates and company. Can they keep it going? Can Missouri get to 3-0? Well, if you've been listening to me every day, you know I think they can do it. So let's talk about the Rebels here coming up in just a little bit, and also more recruiting on the basketball side as well. But first, let's talk about FanDuel, where, of course, I think Missouri could be an interesting one to look at. Let's check it out on Saturday. But, of course, on Friday here, no line just yet. But, boy, the football lines for the NFL this weekend are looking pretty interesting, aren't they? A whole bunch of home underdogs. That rarely happens in the NFL playoffs. Let's be careful out there, everybody. I'll tell you that. But I'll tell you this, profit boosts. That's the way to go. If I'm you, I would almost bet nothing but profit boosts. And if they, obviously, FanDuel's going to cap you, maybe just go up to that cap and take the profit boost, because they're finally actually giving you the edge back. You know what? I like having the edge. So, you know what? Those profit boosts, you got to go after them all the time, in my opinion. And FanDuel is the best place to get in on all the NFL playoff action. So visit FanDuel.com to get your playoff profit boosts every game day. And by the way, some breaking news just came across, well, the old Twitter feed here. Trinidad Chambliss has been denied his 6th year of eligibility by the NCAA. And no, you can't have Austin Simmons back. Sorry, Ole Miss fans. That's not happening. Well, at least I hope it's not happening. And I assume it's not happening based on Simmons, again, making it official in a Mizzou uniform this morning. But, man, another blow there for the Rebels, obviously, after taking a heartbreaking loss to Miami last night. And with Missouri playing in Oxford tomorrow on the basketball court, I, of course, immediately thought about asking Stephen Willis his thoughts about the basketball game tomorrow. But you know what? I think I'm going to give my friend a minute there to decompress after that one and also take in this Trinidad Chambliss news as well. And speaking of some not so great news for Ole Miss, I know it hasn't been a great year for Chris Beard and his basketball program so far, and I have talked to Steven a little bit about Ole Miss hoops, a couple weeks or so ago, and we were both kind of lamenting the state of our teams. Well, obviously, Mizzou's made a fairly dramatic turnaround here these last couple ball games. Ole Miss, not so much. Their SEC play has started with a 16-point loss in Norman, and then a 7-point home loss against John Calipari's Arkansas Razorbacks. Now, the Rebels definitely played a much tougher non-conference schedule than Missouri against the likes of Iowa, Miami, and St. John's, but unfortunately for the Rebs, they've lost them all, and they also lost to what is a pretty bad Utah team this year as well. So when you look at Ole Miss on paper, usually you expect Chris Beard's teams to be very good defensively. I'd say they're okay defensively for a Power 4 SEC type of team. Mediocre, really, is probably more accurate. And, well, that's about right on offense, too. I'm just not terribly sure what this Ole Miss team is good at. And tomorrow when the line comes out, I expect Ole Miss might be favored by a point or two, but I'm not sure I agree with the projections there. I actually think the Tigers should maybe be a point or two favorite in this ball game. Let's not go crazy over at FanDuel Sportsbook or anything, but the point here is that I think Missouri has a very good shot here, catching maybe Ole Miss at the right time to move to 3-0 on the season. Again, this whole run here, the next 5 games before the Alabama game in Tuscaloosa, Missouri has a chance here to get off to a great start in the SEC. And by the way, of course, Missouri's high school recruiting, well, I'll be honest with you all. When it comes to football, I'm kind of bored with high school recruiting. I'm not sure how much I care at this point because of a whole bunch of different reasons. But basketball, at this point anyway, I still care about it, at least for now. And Missouri is getting an unofficial visit from a top 60 player in the 2028 class, Keaton Murray, a shooting guard. He'll be coming to town on January 24th, and don't have any huge hot takes on Murray at this point. Just, again, think it's interesting to note that while it seems like the football side is really focusing, not exclusively, of course, on the portal, but I'd say 80 to 90% of their energy or resources is going toward the portal all of a sudden. I think that's much more of a balance for Dennis Gates and company right now. Just different approaches, obviously, to different sports. But again, from my perspective, high school recruiting for football, my interest in it anyway, is basically dead. Basketball, though, I'm still keeping an eye on it. There's no doubt about that. But hey, thanks for keeping an eye on this program today. And if you're an everydayer, by the way, check out the Everydayer Club for $5 a month or $50 a year. You can get this show ad-free and access to the Locked On Host Discord as well. And by the way, I'll see you all on Sunday. Going to talk about this Ole Miss game. Don't want to get it too stale, so we got to talk some Ole Miss Missouri basketball on Sunday. Hopefully we'll have another victory to talk about. And until then, I am John Miller. Thanks as always for listening to Locked On Mizzou.